Can, Stephanie, you're the host, is that correct?
Um,
Or is it Athena? Athena's still here.
Nina should be the host.
Athena, do you want to make um someone else a host?
Yep, I'll do that.
Thank you. I'm trying to open up my participant. There it goes. There it goes. Good afternoon. It is October 9, and this is a regular meeting of the Community Resources Committee of the Town Council. Pursuant to Chapter 2 of the Acts of 2025, which extends through June 30 of 2027, the ability of public bodies to meet in a remote or hybrid manner without a quorum of members in person, this meeting will be conducted via remote means. Members of the public who wish to access the meeting may do so via Zoom or by telephone. No in-person attendance of members of the public is possible, but every effort will be made to ensure that the public can adequately access the proceedings in real time via technological means. We have a quorum. We have started recording, and I'm going to go around and see if everybody can be heard. Pat,
Yes.
Mandy Jo,
Present.
Kathy Shane,
Yeah, I'm here.
Jennifer Taub,
Yes.
and Pam Rooney's here. Great. Just for folks who are listening, that we intend to spend about the first hour on solar bylaw, and then we'll switch over to housing production plan. And we'll probably see a few more staff people at that time, close to 4. So we have one person in the audience. There are no public hearings. This is an opportunity for general public comment. If the attendee would like to make a public comment, feel free to raise your hand, and you can speak for up to 3 minutes on topics related to the CRC. I don't see any hands. Okay, we will close the public comment period. So moving into action items. Solar bylaw basis is version 16 that we cleaned up, or we added to from last meeting, which was on the 25th of September. And I think I'm going to ask Mandy, if she does such a good job, would continue to help edit as we go along.
I'm happy to, but I was wondering if we could talk about what's going on at the state level first as it relates to our work here.
Sure. Stephanie, do you want to say something, and then Councilor Haneke?
Sure. So I just attended a state information session about the new SMART guidelines. Actually, they're calling SMARTY guidelines now because they include social justice and environmental justice as part of the new regulations components to that revised regulation. And they are doing an additional information session where they're going to, I think, present the regulatory package. And that is being held on Tuesday, October 21st at 2 p.m. I will be happy to
At
provide
2 p.m.
2 p.m.
Thank
correct.
you.
I will be happy to forward that link to you all. I think this one, I got this information from Allison Gage, who has been working directly with municipal staff. So I know some of their information sessions were kind of geared towards staff, but it's certainly absolutely appropriate for board and committee members to be, and governing bodies to be part of these sessions as well, obviously. So so that's happening on Tuesday, the 21st at 2 p.m. And then they are also going to do another session next Tuesday, the 14th, 10/14, October 14th at 3 p.m. And that is going to be specifically, there's going to be one on the solar bylaw. I'm sorry, I believe the one on the one of these is going to be specifically on the draft of the solar bylaw and also the draft BES bylaw. They have been posted now on the DOER website. So you can actually go to the DOER website and check those out.
Stephanie, thank you. If you send anything out, could you kindly send it to everyone? Just to make
Yeah.
sure that everyone here sees it.
Yes, I will
they're
send it
not-
to the committee. And I apologize. I think the general session is on the 14th and the one about the bylaws on the 21st. But I will send that that email that I received. I'll just forward it to all of you.
Great. Councilor Haneke.
Yeah, I feel like a broken record because I'm going to reiterate some things I've said for the past year. But as we get closer to this, the model bylaws came out yesterday or today. They were not on the website Tuesday. They were not on the website when I looked yesterday. This law was passed a while ago, and we've known the regulations and guidelines are coming. They've been out for a little bit. The information session tonight and next week are on those regulations and guideline. There's a public hearing on the regulations next week. And as Stephanie said, on the model bylaws that just came out, there's an information session on the 21st. I was at a policy committee meeting of the MMA on Tuesday, where they were very clear that, and the regulations, draft regulations seem to be very clear that the towns must follow, as we knew, regulations and guidelines. And we're not going to be able to have anything that conflicts with those regulations and guidelines. And the regulations and the law create this comprehensive permit that what we're currently working on right now doesn't even address a lot of the stuff that we will need to address and choices we'll need to make about the local regulatory authority that's in charge of receiving the comprehensive permit application, the one that issues the decision, the one that does any appeals and stuff like that. Just a brief reading, quick reading of the regulations last night. And so I'm going to say it again. Don't believe we should be spending staff time and our time on drafting this right now when we haven't had a chance to look at the model bylaw, because I think what will be most efficient for us is to move what we've done into a model bylaw as long as it doesn't conflict, and really look at the model bylaws, both BESS and solar, there's two of them, to see, and take from there and start our work there and put in some of the stuff we've done. But I don't want to be working on potential language that is going to conflict with those models or with the regulations, in fact, to then have to redo the work. We aren't going to have a lot of time. In other words, what I'm seeing is if we continue this work and it doesn't comport with what comes out, there's no point in holding hearings on what we've done, because we will have to redo it all to comport with what comes out and make sure it does it, and hold hearings on that to adopt a new bylaw. And so I'd rather see us spend our time doing other things and working towards making sure we don't conflict with that model, making sure we're in compliance with it, and maybe importing some of the stuff we've done, but not doing new until we can see and digest what the model is and what the draft regulations and all are, so that we're not working futilely in conflict with things and drafting a lot of language that we're going to have to throw out because it ends up conflicting with the guidelines. And I will say right now, I have no idea if any of what we've done actually conflicts. There's so much to digest that I can't say right now. I do actually know some does. Some of the setbacks that are in our current draft will conflict with the guidelines. But beyond that, I have no idea how much we're going to have to modify, how much we can import and all. I'm just saying I'd rather not work on something that in the end we have to throw out because it does conflict.
Yep. Thank you. Just a quick question. Do you get a sense that they are focusing on a particular scale of construction?
So this is everything for solar, everything below 25 megawatts.
the state will look at everything below
No.
25 meg.
These guidelines apply to everything below 25 megawatts for solar. They also apply to storage of certain sizes, and I could look up the guidelines and all at this point, but the law was anything below 25 megawatts, which is directly where we're dealing with. Anything above 25 megawatts is completely controlled at the state level now. It is a state issued permit, it is a state issued process. Our town will never see any applications for anything above that size. They're calling anything below a small scale solar clean energy infrastructure or something. I'm still trying to learn the language they're using, but yeah, what we're doing now is exactly what the guidelines and regulations will apply to.
Kathy,
I'm just going, while Mandy was talking and saying where to find it, I quickly scrolled through. So it's quite comprehensive, so that it has a section on large scale, but it also does medium scale. And it has on medium and smaller, but Mandy started saying on dimensional, they have it, look at your dimensional table and whatever the accessory uses dimensions are, so how far away from a border. Then for large scale, it gives you more flexibility. So what we've been drafting isn't as comprehensive as what they've done, and it will take some time to go through when they move. And there's a lot of, when we were going through definitionals, what is this? What they have a system definition versus just a photovoltaic array definition. And then they have a, completely off the grid where you're not trying to connect to Eversource, but you're connecting directly. So it's a longer list of things before I even got to whether battery storage is part of it. So there are two documents there. And as I just said, I literally took the 2 minutes that Mandy was talking to scan this. So this is not, Kathy didn't know they were there, so I didn't read them.
so
But,
you're now an expert. Okay.
well, no, I'm a pretty quick read. So I was scanning the scope, because I was wondering whether it was just large scale or not. The other thing that they've given that it's similar to what they gave with ADU is guidance. The guidance material goes, here's where you've got flexibility, and here's where you have to do exactly what we're saying. So it's also a useful document to be looking at, because it's not that everything has to be a cookie cutter. And I just again looked at that. ADU was very similar, and they did something even nicer with ADUs. Is once they actually had a model rather than a proposed model, they said, on this one, you can be flexible, but in these directions. They did little comment bubbles. So it's very helpful for comparing where we are to what they are. And one or several of us would need to do that. It's not possible to do it quickly because it's not aimed at the same, it's not as focused as the focus that we had.
Yeah.
On it.
So I'm thinking as we look forward to what work is on the table. Oh, Pat, go ahead, please.
I wonder, I want to say something, but I also asking Kathy, you said large scale gives more flexibility. Could you clarify that a little or expand it a little bit? I know you just,
So as I said, Pat, this is me 4 minutes worth of reading, but
yeah.
when
No, I appreciate that, Kath.
when it went to dimensional setbacks and side and back, it was very specific for medium. That go to your dimension table, and wherever accessory. So we ran into this with ADU, that an accessory can be closer to.
Yeah, no, I understand that.
So with
but
large scale, they started to go into what are the dimensions for that. So they were more.
Okay, so you're talking specifically about flexibility and dimensional standards?
Yeah, so in other
Okay, that's fine. That's all I needed to know.
Then the other thing they do, Pat, and then I didn't look at what their definitions, they go where these large ones can be located or not. So they specifically looked at that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's
so-
fine. I agree with Mandy that trying to continue this work right now without this body really looking at those would be a waste of time. Much of what we've been doing is a waste of time, which is terribly sad. but I think that I have to agree with Mandy here. And I'm trying to figure out, I know we can't have three people as a quorum, right? No, that's
No.
majority. So it would be good if I would love to either probably work with Mandy, because we don't always agree, and that's great. About looking at this and maybe trying to bring back some cohesive presentation of it for the next meeting. Is that something you?
I thank you, Pat. I was going to ask if people would be willing to form a small group and sit down and actually do what do we have? What is the model saying that we ought to do, and highlight where we're off. The question I have in all of this, and it's obviously none of us here is the expert on the answer, is what can we keep that is important for instance, areas of town where there is no town infrastructure for water, for instance. Is there some flexibility where that, and I, having read Shutesbury, having a water supply is a key part
critical.
of
It's
is
critical.
critical, right? Jennifer, and then Councillor Haneke, and then Stephanie.
Yeah, so I think I think it's a really good idea to have a small group work, but haven't we always been told that even if two people meet together, maybe they can do it in a public, it could be a public
just-
meeting, like,
I was just going to speak to that, Jennifer. I'm pretty sure, if we're not rigid, two people doing a crosswalk with what we've got
Two
and where
people
we
get
have
together.
flexibility would be okay. They're not forming an opinion. They're not writing a document. I think that's okay.
We've done it before.
Yeah,
I would agree.
we've done it before. That's okay. 3 would not, because then we are a quorum, but two would be okay.
I
Jennifer,
think
you
three
want to
would work on a Word doc.
follow?
Okay, I shouldn't be one of them, but I think that's great then.
Councillor Haneke, or Stephanie, you had your hand up.
I did, but I think, were you gonna recognize someone else before me, or are you okay?
Oh, okay, Councillor Haneke.
So if this committee assigns any work that's going to come back to the committee to 2 or more people, it's a subcommittee that is required to comply with open meeting law. Even if it's just a crosswalk. If it's assigned to one person, it's not. I think doing a crosswalk is absolutely essential. And I might be willing to start that work, but I will tell you right off the bat, there's no way I can do it in 2 weeks. And part of that is it's going to take a while to digest. It's not just the model bylaw we have to stare at, it's the guidelines and the regulations, and things are changing. But I would not want to do it before, or have it done before that info session on the 21st regarding the model bylaws. Because I think that's going to be, I attended portions of the info session on Tuesday. I'm going to go to the one tonight. I know the MMA is working hard to come out with, they're discussing it in policy committees, and they're trying to come out with essentially their own guidance to try and distill all of this hundreds of pages of information that is very technical, so that municipalities can figure it out and do something with it. That I got an idea that might be something in the next month coming out, but at minimum, I think we need to go to the info session on the bylaws, because the info session, what they talked about last Tuesday and what they'll talk about tonight, was quite helpful in getting an idea of where things are going, and where they're looking for comments and what might change between drafts and finals, where they're looking specifically know they have some work to do, sort of thing. To go to, I think, Pat's question and Kathy's point, before the model bylaws come out, which I've got and scrolling down, but I can't take any of it in the middle of a meeting. The info session stated that the model bylaws would deal with 3 different sizes of solar installations. up to 25 kilowatts, between 25 kilowatts and 250 kilowatts, I think it was, and then 250 kilowatts to 25 megawatts. 3 different sizes, and Kathy alluded to that. So we still have to figure out what all's going on with that, where things are a little more flexible and all, but we have to, I do think we have to start with some sort of crosswalk that is completely like notated and in words so that we know what was the language, like what the language in the model is and what we did, and then a note that says we think it comports, we should go one way or the other, or it completely conflicts, and is there options and all. It's going to take a while. It's much more, the model bylaw is 18 pages long, and that's not BESS at all. That's just solar. The guidelines were 17 pages. No, the regs.
Ours are 19, so we're
Well, but
comfortable.
no, ours aren't our bylaws though. That's some other stuff too. But the regs were 17. The guidelines are 4 different documents. So it's a lot to take in.
Yeah.
And I don't think
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Stephanie.
So as Councillor Henneke just pointed out, they are still in draft form and they are looking for comment. So one of the
That's-
things that I would encourage you as a municipal, governing committee, I would maybe suggest looking for things where you think it might be missing or where you think you need sort of local oversight to get that feedback to them, because I do think that's something they're looking for right now. I attended the session today. To be honest, it was the first time I've really been able to sit and review what was being presented, and it is very overwhelming. I mean, I've been doing regulatory work for some time, and I just find it very cumbersome. I think Amherst will be fine. I'm more concerned about smaller communities that don't have staff capacity, honestly. And I know they're saying they're going to fund supporting that, which says to me, why are you making it so complicated? But I just encourage maybe looking at what you have, where you do see the differences, but also where you think maybe the state needs to address some of what you want to maintain as local control. Like, I just think that's a very important thing to sort of talk about. One of the points that somebody made today was that it references public waterways, but it doesn't, reference private wells. So that's a very important topic in Amherst, certainly. So maybe those are things you want to look to, or maybe those are the things that the Amherst bylaw can really, look to focus on, those kinds of topics and relevant issues. So I just wanted to offer that as just maybe some guidance.
Thank you. Pat.
Yeah, I want to, after what Mandy said, and I realize that's true, the 2 best minds and processors for doing this would be Mandy and Kathy. And I'd be happy to support that work, but if they would be willing to do that, it would be quite beneficial, I think, to us as a group.
And it will-
Kathy, you've been named.
yeah, I've just been named, but I think the sequence that has just been recommended also makes sense.
Oh, yeah.
It's first is take a look at what is missing or what is vague or where we have an actual difference of opinion with what they've got in the draft to be able to provide comments to it. And Pat, I would imagine that some of the original solar working group might be useful. We don't have to do a single set of comments from Amherst. It can be submitted by individuals. So that would be worth doing since these are still in draft form.
Right.
And then after that, I'm completely willing to try to do the crosswalk. And if Mandy thinks that even doing a crosswalk, sitting down side by side as a subcommittee, I'm willing to do it as a subcommittee. It just means we have to post it and someone has to watch us reading 2 documents and talking to each other, which is fine with me, which is fine with me. I mean, we do it on Zoom. She and I actually work well together in terms of the way our minds organize things. So if we organized a report back to everyone in a way that made sense to both of us. It would probably make sense to everybody in terms of, not just a grid, but really more insightful. So I'm just hearing the timing though. So it's in draft for how long, Stephanie, before it goes to final? So it's in draft, then you've got discussion of it on the 21st. So at what time does it make sense to sit down with what we've got drafted? It seems like after the 21st, and then, our meetings, we've got one on the 23rd of October. So the next one after that is November 6th, just in terms of,
I actually have, do we have one on the 6th or is it the 13th? My calendar shows
Okay.
13.
okay, so
and-
I may just have an
but-
old list, yeah. So I had a November
should
13th
confirm that.
suggest the 6th, but in any case, I don't know which one. But anyway, whatever
I
week.
have a 6 too and not a 13. Just-
Okay, I had a 6. I have a list that says 2nd and 4th, and then it was,
Oh, yeah, because of the holidays. So it may be 6 and 20.
it was 6 and 20 because Thanksgiving.
That's what I
Uh-huh.
have.
That's what I have. I have 6 and 20. So I'm just looking at, Mandy, in terms of when it would make sense to sit down together, is it before the 6th or is it just after the 6th to be ready by the 20th? I'm just looking at a time frame on, I
So
don't
I
want
think
to.
I think
Yeah.
we can come back to this. We don't have our folks here. We don't have Nate or Greg to talk about housing production plan yet, but so actually we have another half an hour. We can talk about it a little bit. Um, I I would make a very strange suggestion, and that is that there are a number of AI programs out there that actually do an excellent job if you take the two documents and say, what are the differences? What is missing in the Amherst document from the state or vice versa? Where are there conflicts? And you may not catch everything, but you catch a whole lot. I did a comparison of 6 different solar bylaws across the state, and it made a nice table of comparisons of the 6 ones. So it's a really cool tool. Counselor Haneke. And I would do that before you sit down together and actually work, item by item with it.
So I was just gonna clarify, if the committee assigns it to 2 people, it's an open meeting and a subcommittee. If the committee assigns it to 1 person and that person chooses to work with someone else, but that person's in charge of the final report back, it is not a subcommittee.
Okay,
Let's do it.
you're
Who wants
you're
to be the person?
No,
Jesus.
make Mandy the lead, but I just gonna say, Pam, I'm totally willing to try something like that. Ours right now has so many strikeouts and comments in the side that AI would be finding interesting things. It's easier if we took Shutesbury compared to what the state's proposing. So it was, Mandy, one of the finance committee people sent me the AI analysis of the Mars reports, and it was amazing. It gave a quick summary of what they said. It was great. But it can do that. So anything that would shorten it. So Pam, I'm not unwilling to do it. I'm just thinking that what we've got is an interesting.
Obviously, use your discretion, but
Yeah.
it's an incredible tool to sort through a whole bunch of stuff.
And I have another, so Stephanie would know this. If the state is stepping in on less than large scale, the way we've defined it, but on the medium, would those automatically, since we haven't been talking about doing those at all, would those be automatically codified in Amherst bylaw somewhere? So if, just lifted, it's been expanded is what I see, is the way they defined it to 3 groupings. And so do we as a town need to look at the subgroups beyond the large is a better way to ask the question.
Yes, I mean, anything below 25 megawatts will be under your jurisdiction, right? I mean, to a degree, you're still gonna have some guidance that you have to follow at the state level, but it will be under your jurisdiction. I mean, I think the complication now is that it all has to be under one permit. So there's also that whole process too. I mean, in my head, it just felt like I just thought of a comprehensive permit. It just seems like the similar process to the comprehensive permit process, and maybe it makes sense to just sort of follow with that kind of guidance. I haven't talked to anybody in town about that at all. It was just what came to me today that makes the most sense. But yes, I would say, it's all, anything under 25 is going to be under your purview. And if the state has sort of categorized it in 3 categories, then you'd have to sort of look at them as well. So that you're sort of looking at apples to apples.
Thank you. In fact, I wrote down that the state guidelines will apply to everything below 25 megawatts. But Stephanie, you just said that anything below 25 megawatts is local jurisdiction. So that's contradictory.
No,
No.
the state is the ruler above.
Above.
Above,
below
okay,
25 megawatts.
That's what
Gets
I
a
thought.
local,
So, okay, but
like
I
it's
wrote,
basically one permit from the community. Above 25
And-
megawatts is at the state level.
yes.
Yeah, but under 25 megawatts, while it's still a local comprehensive permit, it must comply, the issuance of that permit and all of the conditions and things like that and application standards must comply with the state regulations, the guidelines they'll adopt, and not necessarily the model bylaw. The model bylaw is helpful to distill everything that issuing that permit and the process that goes through must comply with and cannot conflict with. So while it is still a local permit, it is in some sense, if you want to think about it as comparable to the ADU, we could still adopt our own ADU bylaw, but it had to comply with the state guidelines. We can still adopt our own solar bylaw, but it has to comply with the state guidelines. And if we do not adopt a solar bylaw or a BESS bylaw, the state guidelines, they have written in that the permits are issued with standard conditions that the state decides.
So I would agree. I would also just point out that it was noted in the meeting today, and it's been my experience. It's similar to the wetlands regulations, right? Because the state's wetland regulations are very, very specific. And our local bylaw has to comply with those, obviously, but can go, to afford more protection. So it's true, but I think it's not unprecedented that there hasn't been the structure. It's a very similar structure to the wetlands regulatory framework. And I still think there's opportunity for the town to afford more protection. Again, I'll bring it up again, but as in private wells and private water supply. And
Yeah.
there'll be other, other areas that the state doesn't really sort of get into. I was thinking about signage and all those other sort of zoning issues that are things that the town's going to want to look at and have specific to Amherst.
Yeah, signage is the least of my concerns.
I realize that I'm thinking in terms of
yeah,
zoning and the kinds of things that you can,
Right.
Obviously bring up.
Yes. So this feels like we've talked about this. To wrap up, my understanding is that there will be a couple of different events that will be very informative on the 10th, 10/14 and 10/21. There's something tonight at UMass and either Zoom or in person. And that prior to the 21st doesn't feel like we should spend a lot of time and energy trying to make comparisons with what's in our books or on our drafting table already. are we all in agreement that either Counselor Haneke or Kathy Shane is the point person? Do we want to nominate somebody to be a point person?
Well,
Who?
why don't they choose?
I nominate Mandy, and then she can have Kathy volunteer to work with her.
That's fine, but it will not be ready by next meeting.
I know.
That's fine.
Make
That's
it
fine.
ready in January so I can be rid of this poop.
Yeah, that,
You can come off for
But think
public
of but
comment.
think of the hours you've spent with us working on solar bylaw.
I
You've
spent
just
hours
worked-
before you guys even got here, so this
so
I
is,
know.
the other recommendation that I would just have, so Mandy, sorry to cut you off, but I'm
well,
just scrolling through. Here's an example in the scan on this. The following are not addressed in the existing site plan review. This is for medium-sized, Lord. The community may wish to include them. Locations of active farmland, prime farmland, location on floodplains, inundation. So they're flagging areas where local might want to address that we say silent. And this was just, so I think all of us should just scroll through this and say, okay, they're explicitly saying we didn't address this, and then that cross. So the more, and this is really readable, I must say, because they have green highlighted the areas where they're saying, oh, by the way, you've got some flexibility here. It's not addressed. So that's a friendly way, friendly way to draft a draft.
Yep.
You know?
Good, good.
Okay,
That's
so
helpful.
it's worth scrolling. So even though it's long, it's partly long because the indentation is sometimes 3 or 4 inches from the left margin. You know, so it's
Right. So I'm gonna make a comment and then go to Counselor Haneke. We were sent, and I put in the packet a public comment that was sent to the Conservation Commission, and it is a very strongly worded letter from a man in Shutesbury who was on the planning board there. They got sued by Pure Sky, and it is an incredibly eye-opening letter just describing what some of the concerns are with basically with Bess. So I think that's something that if as we turn over, some of this to the state or whatever, the concerns that were raised in that kind of a letter, I think are first and foremost on my plate as we try to transition and still meet the guidelines, but have something that works for the protection of Amherst. Councillor Haneke.
Yeah, someone was asking about the potential timelines. The comments for the regulations are being accepted through October 17th. So I believe they were talking about the regulations being finalized in January or February. The guidelines would be finalized sometime after that, and then the model bylaw would be finalized sometime after that. The model bylaw is open for comments until, it says on here, November 14th. So they won't finalize a model bylaw till certainly sometime 30, 60, 90 days, sometime after that is my guess. That's a guess, but certainly not before November 14th if they're accepting comments until November 14th. That what they talked about was trying to have everything in place potentially for the spring town meeting season, but most definitely by the fall town meeting season, so that all the towns that are towns could hold a special town meeting before the regulations take absolute effect December 1 of next year. There'll be this like transition period, but they will have to be complied with by everyone. December 1 of next year is the current date in the regulations. So they're looking at acknowledging that these guidelines, regulations, and all will affect mostly Western Massachusetts and smaller towns because that's where the land is that's not built per se. that they are keeping in mind the town meeting schedules that many of those towns are
Good.
typically on in
Good.
trying to get everything done.
That's great. Okay, so again, I don't see anyone here yet from staff to talk at 4 o'clock about the housing production plan. So let's, I think we're good. We'll get some feedback, and maybe Counselor Haneke, you can send me an email when you decide that you're going to meet, and that you're going to meet with somebody named Kathy, perhaps, to go through the documents. So that'll be good. We'll look forward to that. Let's just talk through, we have no minutes. I'm looking at action items. We still have no minutes. I think that's just it feels like a very lost cause. And I know it's a problem getting somebody to sit there and do it. Maybe we could ask for transcripts from CRC meetings and just get a transcript, somehow into the record. That would actually be okay with me in thinking about it. Pat, you started to say something.
AI, your idea about AI, let AI type up the transcripts. I don't know. Jesus Christ.
That's
We
a good
could-
idea.
We could generate our own little meeting minutes.
Is AI capable of listening to voices?
Right. It could listen to the
I don't know.
meetings, maybe.
So
I
it is-
think-
I
I
have,
think-
I've never used the tool, but there, that was, if Athena figured out with tech people how to do that, boy, would it relieve,
So I don't know who.
I'm gonna
who
take
ke-
my dog out to poop.
yeah,
I'll be
okay, so,
right
but
back,
this
since we
is
got
just,
time
so
until
the answer
4.
on minutes is we don't have them, yeah.
Yeah, we do not have minutes.
Well,
Could we do carryover?
Yeah, so let's talk about carryover. Do we have any carryover items that,
I think we now have solar bylaw.
We're gonna have the solar bylaw. Because
darn,
at least my personal thought is until that model bylaw or the guidelines are finalized, we definitely shouldn't recommend anything back for hearing. Because
Yes. Yeah.
you want to know what you've got to comply with before you go through the hearing process.
right? I feel good about the time spent in a way, though, because we have all learned a lot. And I think that's important when we go to see a state, it's just like the ADUs. There were some things that were okay, but really needed clarification. Jennifer.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say the first thing that we talked about when I came onto the council was the solar bylaw moratorium proposal. So the wheels of government move slowly.
And Stephanie gets to spend such quality time with us. So carryover, yes, solar. Is there, so the citizen petitions were not referred to CRC, so those are not on our plate. I don't know if or when they might get sent over to us, but for right now, it's not with us. Housing production plan, again, we don't have a real sense of what is expected of the CRC and what they are looking for in terms of process. So that's one of the questions that we want to ask. So housing production plan may or may not. We have a couple months in the year. Hopefully we wrap up with that.
Can I just ask, is the version that's marked June, that is, you had a link to it, Pam, but that is I didn't cross-check it with what the council had, but I'm assuming, because there was a May version and a June version, so June's okay.
I hope that's the right
Yeah,
one.
but I was told that June was the current and that it's not much different, if at all, from May.
No, okay.
I suppose we could
Next-
ask Greg today what is specifically different, if anything.
Well,
Mhm.
I don't need that as much, it's just, I'm started to type up my notes and realized they weren't well organized for anyone else to read them, and I have to read through it. So let me, while we're on it and they're not here yet. And this is, you're going to get a sense of Kathy's compulsiveness. And Mandy, I think way back when you questioned whether our census numbers were right? You know, whether the census really does a good count of, and I know we cannot change, it's the 2020 census, that's it. But if I use the census proportion of people in different age brackets and turn that into numbers, it doesn't match what we think the student population is. It just doesn't match it. And then if I do the census population that they think, you know, so when I say, who do I think is not student, meaning college student, you know, if I take anyone out under 18 and anyone from 45 to 65 and 65 older, I get a different number than if you just start with the census number and subtract UMass, Amherst, Hampshire, and
Yeah.
you know, so I just get a different number. So
Kathy, I'm gonna put you on pause just for a second. So I don't think we want to get into the details
So
of this
I'm
until-
using it as an example, Pam. I don't know what you said. Where does CRC jump in on this? This is me reading it the way I would read a research report. And if I was a reviewer of a technical document, and that's the way and then I go from that to do the conclusions, follow the data. So whatever
Right.
I think, I do here's the information, and so I don't know to what extent we're supposed to read it that way or not. It's I'm using it as an example of, you know, statements, because that's the way I was trained to read this kind of a document. Not in a town like this, but more generally.
Yeah, I think it sounds like a very rational process to me. It's kind of how I look at data. Jennifer,
Yeah, I was,
You muted yourself
You
when you
just-
said
you just muted.
I'm
you
sorry,
touched
no,
my
I
knee.
guess we should talk to them about this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, to the consultants, but I didn't get the sense that actually the numbers that they were using to analyze necessarily came from the census data, but it came from knowing what the colleges and
Other
universities say,
sources.
how many are living on campus, how many are living off campus.
Are we talking about the housing production plan right now?
Yes, we
Yeah,
are.
so I
Yes,
think we
we've
should
got-
wait
we've
and
got
ask the
a-
Yeah,
consultants.
so all I'm saying is that if I start reading it that way, is that one of the things we're supposed to be doing?
Yeah, I think, yes, I think we're supposed to be asking what doesn't make sense to us.
And it's, and the consultants then, do they try to reconcile that, or they just try to acknowledge it? So this is what, I'm trying to be constructive, not destructive on it, but to me, I should be doing that. So that's a question that I think you said, what is at
Yeah.
what level of a close read should we be reading it? And then I know, Pat, you originally had said we don't have to, or Mandy, none of us have to say we like these strategies versus those strategies. I wasn't going there at all.
Yeah, no, I understand that.
Yeah.
The 2013 housing production plan obviously was passed, right? And most of those strategies weren't implemented, which is probably part of the reason that we are in the crisis we're in now. You can have anything in that thing. It's a requirement by the state. It does not determine policy. And the hoo-ha about it and about our neighborhoods and all that other stuff really shouldn't be filtering into this.
But I felt very differently about the 2013. I read that carefully and I thought it made fewer leaps, Pat, and it put out a number. And I've actually been curious, you know, put out a target number. And I've been curious on how close did we come in 5 years, or even did we achieve it in 10 years, which I think
That's a good question, but
you know, it was, so I like that because it said 250 or whatever the number was. And did we if we weren't there in 5 years, we're there in 10 years, because a lot happened after 2013. So Pat, all I'm asking is it is a statement, and they start the whole document with, because we are at more than 10%, we're already a safe harbor. So we're supposed to do this, but we don't have to do a lot more. And I love
That's what
that.
I'm saying.
I love the data they gathered. So that's where I wanted to start. And there were some things that weren't carried over to, it's not until page 18 that they start with the data. So there is a lot of words that happen before we get to page 18. And so that's the way I'm reading it, first from the body back to it. And so it's a statement that we're making as a town. It's not supposed to be just a consultant document. And so I think needing some guidance on the level, and I'm willing to do it on a, just on that kind of read, if that's part of what we're supposed to be doing. That's my.
Okay, so this is a good opportunity for you to sort of get your thoughts clarified so you can succinctly ask Nate and Greg those questions, right?
And I don't believe, from seeing the planning board discussion of it, anyone read it that way.
They didn't read it, I don't think.
Yeah.
Jennifer,
Okay, so what would, when this was referred to CRC, were we asked to do? To recommend it to the council to adopt? I mean, is that what is going to happen with this? The council will vote to adopt it?
We were asked to make a recommendation on whether to adopt. The
Okay,
state
so that's what
requires
CRC is
adoption.
tasked with doing.
Yeah. I have comments on that, but yes.
Okay.
do you want to save your comments for when Nate and
Well, I think
Greg
we might as
I'm
well.
not sure I need to, because it's more about our committee. We were tasked with making a recommendation to the council on something the planning board already adopted. But, and I understand
Notice
some of
what's
these
for dinner.
comments might be somewhat contradictory, but I think if our role then is to come back to the council and say, yes, we recommend adopting as is, or no, we don't recommend adopting as is because we would like the planning board to consider X, Y, Z, and beyond, and then give the council the option of adopting or not, based on that recommendation, or sending it back for further consideration for X, Y, and Z. I guess I'm saying I'm getting more and more uncomfortable with our committee saying we need to go back to the consultants and bring the consultants in to change a document, without the council saying, yes, that's what we should be doing, versus just making that recommendation to the council that says, hey, whether we're, I'm clearly on the, I'm comfortable with this, I would recommend to just adopt it, but letting the council weigh in on whether it's in such a form that it should not be adopted and more work by the consultants or whatever should be done, and what that is. Because I don't necessarily think it's our role to go directly to the consultants and say, hey, you need to change this, because we can't send to the state 2 different versions. And they've already adopted one of them. The planning board has. So somehow if there's a change, it needs reconciled somehow. And that's not, I think that's for the council to make that decision, not us.
Kathy and then Jennifer, thank you.
Mandy, I agree with what you just said. So I think when I was raising this, it would be to the extent, and I haven't gone through it and to say, where is it just these 2 things and they can't reconcile them to, that kind of thing. So I think what you're suggesting is, to the extent we as a committee get to a point, there's some areas that we're not comfortable with, we go back to the council. I'm paraphrasing what I think I heard you say, with we think the planning board needs to relook at the following areas. So we're not, we're otherwise fine with certain pieces. And the council would be voting on that recommendation, where the alternative would always be to adopt as is. Because we got a document marked draft. That's why I asked. It still says marked draft. It doesn't say final with the clerk's a signature on it, that the planning board has said this is a perfect document at this point. And they clearly started working from some of the numbers in it, the subcommittee did, and with some of the pieces. So that, Nate, what you're coming in on is how close a read are we reading? And my training is to start with the whole data section and then say, are there conflicts within or did it not go far enough? Are there conflicts? Does the conclusion section follow the data section? That's the way I read a document like this. And if the conclusion section went further than what was in the data, I would recommend deleting those areas. That is the way I'm trained to read a policy document like this. And in my past life, people used to read my documents like that, and I had to go back to the drawing board because I took a leap, I took too big a leap from certain information. So I didn't know whether we were supposed to try to read it that way with get to a comfort level. And I wasn't proposing, Mandy, bringing the consultant back in to do a rewrite. But to the extent we have concerns, assembling them in a way that it would be easy for the consultant to say, oh, that's an easy one. I agree with that. That could be a change. I wasn't doing, on line X, wasn't doing a line edit, wasn't a copy edit. Yeah. So Nate, I didn't know whether the expectation is, Mandy's suggestion is we either accept it or don't accept it. If we don't accept it, we're sending it back to the planning board with some pointed comments about areas of concern or areas where we think it needs to be rethought. Is that the level we're supposed to be reading it at?
Yeah, I mean,
Nate,
thanks, Nate Malloy, everyone, a planner with the town, just for anyone listening. I don't, unless there's changes, the planning board isn't the one to recommend those changes. So they've already moved it forward and recommended it. And so I think I think what I was hoping to say in the next meeting, this one and the next one of CRC, would be to say, what are the areas that really need possible revisions? And, Greg and I have been in contact with Judy Barrett and her team, and they would be willing to make some changes depending on, where it is. We're hoping they were going to be here today and they won't. And so, I would like to then actually explore, what does that mean for those changes? And so really it's a recommendation to council. Does the council adopt it as is or not, or are there changes that would want to be made? And if so, then it would go back to the planning board and they would have to look at it again, but it doesn't necessarily need to go back to them. And, I think Greg and I were trying to have a framework for the comments. Is it, say, outside the scope of the document? Is it informational? Is it something that is really necessary? There's the state has guidelines for the housing production plan. And so when they look at this document, they're not, they're going to make sure that it follows the guidelines in terms of what it has. Does it have the right sections? Was there a needs assessment? The data, what they use for their data sources? Are there strategies? Are there production goals? And I'm not sure they're going to actually have any comments about the substance of what's in there, what the recommendations are. It's really just, does it follow the form? And then they'll say your plan is approved. And then we have to get a plan certified. And so communities will, produce a housing production plan because they're not at safe harbor. So, they're not at 10% or they don't have their land area in terms of affordable housing. And so they'll have a housing production plan and they'll work really hard to get certified, meaning they'll produce the minimum number of units needed, which is 0.5%. It's in state regulations. It's not based on the actual number of units in a community. So every community, it's 0.5% is your minimum. And so communities will work really hard to get there. And if they do that, then they can get their plan certified, and then they're at a safe harbor for a time, so they could have better negotiations with a comprehensive permit. So some communities might jumpstart a housing production plan thinking, oh, well, we might have a comprehensive permit in a year or two. We're going to try to fast track a housing production plan in some units so then we can, better manage a comprehensive permit application. And, in Amherst, we don't need to do that. So we like the idea of a housing production plan just because of the framework it provides, and it is a state tool. So it's something that if we do have it approved, it helps us apply for grants. We're eligible as a housing choice community. And so it's, in some ways it's necessary to have a housing production plan, even though we're at Safe Harbor. Because it provides a nice, it's, to me, it's a nice data source. It's consolidates information. I think some of the things that were discussed at the last CRC meetings are things that to me would be talked about after the plan's adopted. So, if there's strategies, like I said, that we don't think are worth pursuing, we don't pursue them. So this plan isn't a legally binding document that says, well, we're going to pursue all 27 strategies or whatever is in there. I think some of it would be, though, are there things that are really, we want qualified? So for instance, like the student housing piece, to me would be, if we want that strategy qualified, would it be that we have a paragraph that could say that, right, so the students really influence the housing market in Amherst. And so, the consideration is we need more student housing. It doesn't say where or who builds it or what it is, but maybe there's, something that could be added to the plan that explains that a little bit, that, and also that it's a regional problem. It's a, there's, Amherst can't solve it all. I mean, I'm just kind of just putting this out there. Is that, is that the kind of change we'd want? Because I don't think, to me, removing the strategy, it doesn't directly create affordable housing, but I think we have to address that part of that market, the housing market, because it really influences our pricing. And so to me, I think a shortfall of any plan would be not to mention students at all. So Hadley recently completed a housing production plan or a housing study, and I think they mentioned students like 3 times the whole document. And there was one line that said students really influence the housing market. But to me, it's much more than just they influence the housing market. And so we asked the consultant to actually talk a lot about the students, because the last one didn't as much, because I think it's really important to know, some of the metrics there and what does it mean? Really in terms of like what kind of housing would the students need, what's their income, how do they influence the housing market in terms of pricing and demand? And so, most communities have maybe some kind of market that is stronger than the other. We just have a really prominent one. Yeah, and I think, Kathy, like your read of like how does everything flow? Sure. It could be that the consultant is, Judy's on a number of housing production plans, her firm. And so they might just have a lot of strategies they say are useful, and it may not flow right out of the housing needs assessment. So, they might think that, certain types of financing mechanisms are a good strategy to try to get at home ownership. And maybe it could be like, well, the needs assessment talks about home ownership, and then the strategy might be talking about, generically how to, finance something. It's like, well, is it really tied to this demographic? But to me, that's something that we would do after the fact and say, okay, how do we make that strategy work for Amherst? Because we didn't ask them to, get down to that level of detail.
Yep.
And so, same with like senior housing. It mentions it a little bit. Typically in Amherst, the seniors are not income eligible, right? So most senior households wouldn't be qualified as affordable housing. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't look into it. And so I think it is an important piece. So if we think, well, how could we provide affordable senior housing? And if the plan doesn't do a good job on it, I mean, we still could pursue it as a priority. It's just, I think overall that segment of the population isn't typically income eligible. So they didn't spend a lot of time talking about it.
Thank you. Jennifer, and then Kathy.
I had initially raised my hand to get clarification on the planning board. Did the planning board adopt it, or the planning board is recommending that the council adopt it?
No, I'd have to go back. I think it was they recommend. Oh, did they recommend or did they adopt it? I think they adopted it as the housing.
Adopted it.
So if
as a
they
town.
adopted it, does the council have to adopt it?
That's
And
what
they've
the
adopted it whether the council does or not, apparently.
Well, the state regulations want the 2 votes. So they want the planning board, and then the way that, it's phrased is like the chief executive officer, and then, they say whether it's council or select board. And so to me, in the regulations, we had some guidance from a state official, and they said, yes, we'd want to vote by town council. So really you have 2 separate votes. So it's by planning board and by council. And then
And the
if that,
two documents would have to be the same.
well,
Like if the
yeah,
council were to make some changes, it would have to go back to the planning board and they'd have to agree.
yeah, yep.
Yeah.
And then, what that enables the town to do is then to submit it to the state. And so if the votes don't occur, then the plan, we still could use the plan locally. It just doesn't move on to be approved by the state and then get cataloged as something that we completed. And so, some communities actually create a housing production plan. And it does live locally. It seems strange to go through the effort and then not try to get it to the state for approval.
Yeah, I think it should go to the state for approval. I just would want to see some changes. It absolutely, a housing production plan has to discuss the pressure that not enough on-campus housing is creating in our off-campus housing market. My issue is when the plan says we should go out and encourage the building of more off-campus student housing, I just don't see why we even have to do that. We know it's coming to us. There's no seemingly end in sight to the appetite to build more off-campus senior housing here. We don't need to go out, and it's
Student
distinctly
housing.
not affordable housing. So if this is about affordable housing, why would we explicitly want to go out and make sure we bring in more housing, which we don't need to cultivate that. It's coming to us. That is actually not affordable. And yeah, so that's, and when they talk about upzoning, which I have, again, I live in a neighborhood that is zoned for everything and it's great, but if, we can't have our heads in the sand if we're going to change the zoning and there's no particular incentive for non-student housing, it's just going to be more student housing priced by the bed. So I just, I don't see, so I think a lot of the plan is excellent, but, this was to say, well, we don't need to do it just because it's in the plan. Ever since I've been on the council, people point to what they like in our plans and say, how can we not do that? It's in our master plan. They will say, how can we say we should not be going out encouraging more pricey off-campus student housing? It's in our housing production plan. So I feel very uncomfortable allowing certain language to be there. It's like signing a contract and then, say we'll negotiate the terms after. So I like, 98% of the plan. I don't know that, but the way it is actually written now, that's what I would like to address. But I don't feel comfortable saying we should adopt it and then, try and worry about what we don't like after.
Kathy,
Okay, I'm doing my best to just stay away from the strategies now. So I have a view on the strategy list. I also have a view on some of the conclusions, these paragraphs. As I said, we don't get to the base until page 18. So these are questions, Nate. In other housing documents that I've seen, even the SMART developer documents, there's always a discussion of with housing comes infrastructure costs. So you have to be aware of them in terms of, and this is often in the context of you expect it to support the local budget and infrastructure, sewer, water, schools, police, fire. I don't think there's much of a discussion of that in this report. So that's a comment. The second comment I had, and the reason I sent you a list on seniors. So I don't think some people in housing in the larger world. So I forget what I read a week ago. And the consultant was saying, we've all been hoping for what he called the silver tsunami, that people who had aged in place and children had left their house would decide to downsize. And so there would be a smaller unit. And I look at my road and I say, yes, all the way down to Pelham Street, every house had 2 to 3 children in it. And now sometimes there's one person left in it. So the issue of senior housing isn't so much affordable housing, but any housing that you would move into, you know, condos or something that are age 65 and older. We've got Applewood with a 10-year waiting list in it, you know, that talks about rejiggering the housing supply. So I'll try to read it more carefully, but it's an observation, and so it's and I'm not sure they can get it out of the census data. So a friend of ours looked once at how many households have any children in them, and over time the answer was fewer and fewer. And so we've got these bimodal things, and an earlier housing strategy when we first were elected as counselors, where we are an incredibly attractive site for seniors to move into. Because of the universities. It's, you know, so if we think of the kinds of people that want to buy into our market, and it's the universities. And so this was more on a development, Mandy and Pat, it was sort of a development, you know, what makes us an attractive year-round community that seniors, and Hampshire was going to build those at one point on their campus, and they didn't because the price, they didn't have the money. So I'm looking for things like that, and that might be a strategy rather than a conclusion. But I think we have a lot of what I would call aging in place, which implies a need for support services. But it also says we don't have any place for people to move. So this analyst said we were all hoping for it, and we realized we never built any place. There wasn't any place that people could move to. So there's no, people aren't going to move out of their
Right.
house. That there isn't that missing middle. There isn't, we've got Amity Place. We've got a few clusters like that, but there aren't cluster cottage kinds of environments that people would give up their own private home and move into a more communal. So I'm going to go back and read through the data section on, and then the point they make at one point, they do a really nice job of looking at how much developable land we have that doesn't have something built on it that's not wet. And I was hoping we would get these overlay kinds of maps. Here's land, but then put something on it that says wetlands, floodplains, because sometimes you look at the lots and half the lot would not be buildable in terms of what. So this, how much land do we have that doesn't have something already built on it that we could build more on? So that's the kind of read I want to go all the way through, because they gathered a lot of that data and people loved it. And I went to 3 or 4 of the meetings they had with these transparencies. And I asked them if they could do this, and let me see if they did do it, because I gave them an example of years ago when I worked on a cancer, when CDC worked on a cancer map of New Jersey, and each cancer got its own color. And as they put down yellow for liver and then something else for heart, the places that had all of the cancers turned out to be these black holes. You know, and so I was looking for, you know, non-developed land, how much we have, and then overlays of wetland and things like that. So let me reread it to see whether they did that, because I think we often have the impression there's a lot that could be built on, and I'm not sure there's as much as we think that's not already conservation or protected farmland. You know, we have beautiful open spaces. So I just want to go back and read the presentation of information, because I thought they did a fabulous job of pulling a lot of information together. And I know you all worked hard with them to point them to where to go for it. So I want to do that. And then, as I said, look at the beginning to see where they stretch concluding kinds of comments beyond what they could see in the data. That was because someone made a comment somewhere and it turned into a whole paragraph. But no, that wasn't in the information they were looking at, just someone said it. And it was represented as if 50% of the people think this way. So I wanted to try to remove some of that. And those are a lot of those bubbles. I call them the little bubbles, you know, a bubble shows up. So I'm willing to, I said I would do this before, write this up in a way that wouldn't go on for volumes. That's not page by page, but bigger items. And I think that's what you said. And my understand, and Mandy, you may think these are all too small to even worry about. So, you know, we may have disagreement among the five of us. And I'm going to try to come back to strategies at the end of my thinking rather than at the beginning. Because I do think it's a guidance document, Pat. And what I'm hearing is that technically we don't really need to do it because of what we've done, but it gives us targets, which I think are good. You know, gives us aspirational goals, and we can disagree on how we might want to get there. The word affordable is used, but they do point out that anything you build that's new is very expensive. And so it tends to be, even the little houses tend to be pretty expensive unless someone subsidizes their building. The duplexes up here are extraordinarily expensive, but I
Yeah.
think that's somewhat the state overlay on what it takes to get state grant funding, that there's a lot of time and effort to just get the money, but they're really expensive. So each half of the duplex is out of that median income range.
It's $6,000 to $7,000, $100,000 each unit is
Yeah,
$600,000 to
and it's-
$700,000.
You know, so I saw some up in Sunderland that were more like 450 to 500 for each of the halves, you know, so it's not an easy lift unless you're doing a whole cluster of them and that someone has the initial financing. So it does produce more housing. I'm not saying it's bad to build that because we do have families that would like to live in those. We just don't have very many of them.
Kathy, I'm gonna go to Counselor Haneke, and then I actually wanted to say something as well. Thanks.
So I will state in the public meeting that I think a lot of Kathy's comments are too specific and to get more down to a format of a report that you just don't agree with than the actual content of the report. At least if I'm understanding them, Kathy, and I could be misunderstanding, but it sounds like something like on page 41 of the PDF, there's a bubble that says 31% of households with disabilities think their home's accessibility for current and future household members needs work or is a major problem. And it sounds like you would say delete that bubble. But if
Well,
that
because
bubble is actually
at-
accurate, why delete it? It's an accurate comment, and that's what the consultants chose to pull out. Maybe you would have pulled something else out, but that to me is too in the weeds for what we are asked to do.
Did you look at the source for the 41%? That's the only thing I'm objecting to, Mandy. Sometimes it is the census data. Sometimes it was a non-representative survey that was done. So I tried to figure out where those bubbles come
But
from.
even if it's the non-representative survey, it's still an accurate comment based on the data they got. That doesn't mean the data's complete. But I guess that's what I'm saying is that's a disagreement in how the report is presented, not necessarily something that I personally, I guess it's not something I would be tasking the council to ask the consultants to change and spend more money on to change because the report look and the data they decided to pull out is not to my liking.
Okay, so we would, and the actual results of the survey aren't in the report, by the way, you know, so that I can't even see where it came from. So it's a trust me. So yes, we would read those. I don't mind anything that pulls it out of a table that I can find somewhere in the report. You had a survey a couple years ago where people were pulling out one comment out of a report, and I didn't feel it was a representative comment. You know, so I just think it weakens their report because so much of it is drawn from really solid presentation. I think it weakens it, and I think they thought it made it more user friendly. I didn't think that, but yes, we could disagree about that, and I'll just make a list of them and where do I think those numbers came from? You know, how
Thank
many
you.
seniors are planning to move out of town, for example? How many?
They didn't ask me.
Correct.
So I have a couple
Then you
questions,
didn't fill
and
out the questionnaire because the questionnaire asked that question.
I think I did. I did answer that. I did do a questionnaire. Nate, I had a couple of items and I think one of the areas that I would like some closer scrutiny is the projection of units needed. And I think it felt, I think our target based on the sort of the state values was something like 250 units over the next 5 years. And yet our trajectory was aimed at 700 to 900 units over the next, whatever the period was. And my reaction to that, yes, I mean, more people certainly could move to Amherst. That's not the issue. But Kathy touched on one of the items, and that is for 700 to 900 more units, what is our infrastructure capacity today? Do we have the capacity for that growth? And that's an important one because we're going to be spending almost $750,000 just doing the sanitary infrastructure survey. That's we're going to be faced with some big bills. Does our infrastructure support that? The trajectory for 700 to 900 more units feels like it was predicated almost entirely on the number that was used for students that are off campus who don't currently live in Amherst, but are just dying to get in here. And that was the number of 9,000 additional students beyond the 9,000 that already live in town. Where did that number come from? I don't, every time I have done the math, it's more like it ranges from like 2,500 to 3,000 or 4,000 at the very most of students who don't live specifically in Amherst. The numbers based on enrollment at UMass is like 32,000 students. We have been told time after time from Nancy Buffone that the active students on campus are only about 85% of that number. So of all the enrollment, because the 15% are completely online, I mean. So the 27,000 active students are the ones that want to be somewhere within the commuting area of Amherst. 14,000 of them live on campus. So now you're down to 13. 9,000 live in town. What's that leave us? 4,000. Another 1,000 something live, call it 2,000 live in the immediate surrounding towns. So now you're talking about 2,000 additional students that are clamoring to get into the Amherst area. That is very, 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 very different than 9,000. And I don't think that Amherst itself should be the ones on the hook to provide the housing for those 2,000 additional students. And it certainly shouldn't drive our housing production numbers that strongly. Nate.
Sure, thanks. The questions about, say, the mapping that Kathy had and you had, Pam, about infrastructure, to me, that's beyond the scope of the housing production plan. So they do have maps to talk about water, sewer, and the extent of all that. But I think there's too many variables to say, can we actually handle an extra how many other units, right? So it all depends on, the water usage now, what is predicted, what's happening with the institutions, energy conservation measures, individually. So to me, that's well beyond the scope. And so I think, if we want to, we could say, yeah, sure. How do we make our systems work for an extra 1,000 households? I don't, but that's something that to me is beyond the scope. The target range of 700 to 900 has nothing to do with students. It's from a table on the previous page, and what the report is saying is that there's actually, a few thousand households that are cost burdened at different AMI levels, 30%, 50, 80, 100, and 120. And maybe there's some students in there, but it's not, really the idea of that 700 to 900 is housing that's attainable and affordable to different demographics. So some of it's capitally affordable, some of it might be, they mentioned up to 120% AMI. And so that 700 to 900 is addressing what they determine as the housing need, the gap of, who's cost burdened here, and based on, these different income levels. And so, it's not saying like, oh, let's build 900 new units for students. It's saying actually we've determined that I think it was like 2,600 households are cost burdened, and we think there needs to be more housing to try to, have, different housing opportunities and price points. I will say Greg is here too. I don't know, he's not visible, but he emailed me. I do see his name. I don't know if he's
I do see it. Yep. Let's see if we can.
and so yeah,
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah.
I've been on since 4.
it's just kind of interesting. We actually, staff had a discussion about this community target number because, typically, right, you just have this formula and it's, 265 units based on the state. And I think Barrett Consulting felt that, I think they often do this. It seems like they must provide this other range because they're like, well, the state's number doesn't, it's just a fact, it's something that's been in the regulations, for 50 years or 60 years. And so, they wanted to come up with what they thought was, they say it an ambitious goal, right? But here's what they think based on the need, what they think, the housing market, who would want to move here, all these factors in Amherst, here's what is, a possible range. And so you could say that actually it's more, if they're saying that there's, 1,670 households are cost burdened, 829 are severely cost burdened. And so what they're saying is, well, there's a lot of need for more housing at different price points. And to me, that's what the community target is. I think, Kathy asked earlier, like, how well do communities do and how well did Amherst do with housing production numbers? And it's actually really, Amherst did really well in the late 2000 teens. I think, a lot of it was, mixed use buildings downtown or different things, but we had, we permitted a lot of units, and we had some affordable units. I think a lot of communities, it ebbs and flows with the economy and it's cyclical. And so, I think it's really hard to have a steady production of, say, 50 affordable units every year. And so that would mean that, you'd have our Wayfinders project is, years out. And that means you'd have to have another one already in permitting and going through financing and maybe another one. And so what the state, to me, that's, the 265 number is actually affordable units in 5 years. And that's a really difficult thing to achieve. It's a really big number. And so I think it's, if we did 30 affordable units a year, that's, to me, fantastic. Doesn't mean that we shouldn't try, right? Or we shouldn't come up with different ideas. And so,
So it's thinking about Ball Lane, those are affordable. They're very, very expensive, but they're going to be affordable units, but that takes 5 years to do. So right. You're going to do what, 6 a year on if you average it out.
Yeah, Ball Lane's affordable to the end user, right? So the way it's subsidized, a homeowner can afford, I think they wanted the sale prices to be, 150,000 to like 225. So you're getting in at a very, your purchase price is reasonable because of the subsidy. But right, so I think Ball Lane's a really nice project. That's that doesn't, that we need a lot of those. And what I think was really unique about it is it's a nice home ownership opportunity. We don't see a lot of home ownership opportunities. And so, yeah, I think, these goals would, the Housing Trust had their strategic plan too. They updated it the other year and they had some numbers too. And I think it's really more of a measure of, if we had the ability, maybe we could do this, right? But I think there's, between the financing and the construction market and, all the other variables and factors in the real world, it's really hard to get there. I will say some communities out in Eastern Mass, they would do a housing production plan because they, around the 495 belt, even now sometimes they get like, a 500 unit project, right? Or a 300 unit project. And so, for them, that's a really, that's impactful. And they can have affordable units in there and they can maybe get their plan certified. In Amherst, I don't know that we would see a project that big.
That would be Leverett. Just kidding.
Yeah, I think that was 700 units, so.
Kathy and then Jennifer.
And that, Nate, what you just said was very helpful,
Yeah.
including Pam focusing on that number. So I also want to go back and look at the math. So I think the answer to this is they can't really do it, but I was curious on the cost burden number that comes out of census. Since North Amherst, we happen to had this virtue of being the right census tract because we rank really high, and we always were, when there were still those tax credits to build in a poverty stricken, we were one of them. And when we looked around, we thought it was because of these huge apartment complexes we have that house people who are currently students at UMass, and that the students' incomes while they're in college are very low. Do you have any notion of whether they can split that number out by just by, above 25, age 25 and below age 25, just something on what the household unit is? Because I was just curious. It's not that I don't think it exists all over town, but I think we have, fortunately, the units we have up here, because Puffton was built so long ago, they really look affordable compared to what you see in the downtown, the new buildings. So they're much lower, but I just thought that the student population is stretching their budget enormously in some of the new buildings, and they've been filling up. And so I don't doubt that they're high stressed. And you can pull in a particular demographic of students that families can afford it. And this is purely, Mandy, where I said I don't like observational data. I'm just watching the cars that people are driving and the coffee they're buying up in Beacon. And these are the students are clearly have some family support behind them. So I just don't know whether you can split it. That I was curious on how many people are cost burdened there are above age 25, not the little kids. And I don't know whether they
Kathy,
can.
Kathy, excuse me, I'm having trouble following your question. Are you asking, are students affecting the cost burden numbers?
Yeah, absolutely. So if we have 39,000 or 40,000 people living in Amherst, and we say, and whatever number of household units those are, we get 1% who are cost burden, and that's all out of census. And I really trust those numbers a lot. I was wondering how much of that is in an age demographic that's likely student as opposed to the rest of Amherst, are 35 and older or 65-year-olds. And I don't want it broken out. We don't have good enough data out of census to go into ever smaller, just to pull one group out. I don't know whether they can do that.
Yeah, I can speak to that a little bit, and that is sort of just a limitation of the census data as it pertains to Amherst, but it is broken out in various places by family households versus other households. So a family household, would imply like a non-student household, and you do see a couple different places in the plan where the family households have higher average.
Okay, no, that's helpful. I'll just look at it.
But then there's
Yeah, I think Greg, you're cutting out a little
just for
bit.
clarity too. Oh, sorry. Sorry, and can you hear me okay right now?
Yeah, I can.
Maybe I'll shut up then if I'm okay. Yeah, and just included in households are off-campus students, but on-campus students are not included in any of the income numbers. They get categorized separately in the census.
Okay.
But yeah, no, I think Kathy, to your point, it's really hard to kind of dissect that data and pull it out. You can do it by age. So in the table, they do have household types. So they have like family, non-family, and they're trying to find ways to break that down a little bit. But I do think, I think that what they're saying though is what's reported on the census, and then also based on what the housing costs are, here's what is cost burden. So actually, I know that students have family support, but to be spending, $2,000 a bedroom, I think will cost burden a lot of families too, right? And so,
Oh, yeah, these are,
so I think it's, but I think I agree. I think it's the numbers are really hard to parse out.
yeah, no, I agree. It's just been kind of stunning. We had someone who wanted to come up here from New York, an older guy, and he was going to rent one. And he said, "Oh my God, you've got prices that are starting for rental, starting to approach New York." And if I wanted a 2-bedroom unit, that's what he was looking for. And it didn't come with a yard. He thought if he came out of Manhattan, he could get a yard. But yeah, I think the rental prices are stunningly high.
Yeah, so
In
there's a chart, cost burden by household type, and they describe they have an elderly family, elderly non-family, large family, small family, and other non-family, and then they describe what those are based on HUD and census. And so,
Okay.
but I think the whole census thing is interesting. The 2020 format changed from previous, so the long form wasn't as detailed, and so some of the information too that you could have used comparatively for historical information is not as easily cross-referenced. That's not, that's the census. It's not anything the consultant would do or could do. And so then we use, the American Community Survey and some other data points to try to then get more accurate or more recent, survey ranges and things. So then, some of the, I feel like if it was probably a similar form that they used in 2010 and 2020, you'd have a few different charts here in the housing production plan, but that's just not the way the data was collected.
Thank you.
I'm going to go to
both-
Jennifer. I'm going to go to
Those were
Jennifer.
both very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, there's just a comment. I mean, that's when you talk about it's the home ownership opportunities and then the affordable housing seems to all come through more public and grant that kind of money. It just doesn't seem to be getting built with private money. The private developer money is really all going to housing, expensive rental housing, and priced for households where expenses are split. So we're so challenged to build more ball lanes, or I would say Amity Place, that's not even affordable anymore. But so, again, so we're now, I'm sorry, I'm forgetting the term, but we're a housing choice community because we have built so many units of housing. Unfortunately, really all those 99% of those units are not affordable. I mean, we know we know what they are and how they're priced. But just as, I mean, I know that there are more important issues in the, housing production plan, but my concern with the report is there's some editorializing, and maybe it's even, if not editorializing, but it's some of that, is what Kathy said, that some of their conclusions or their recommendations or their opinions don't jive with their own data. So they say on page 137 that the way we can manage shifting demographics is if we made the students feel more welcome, then they would stay here after graduation, and that would be a way for us to grow our community of families and young workers. Did I freeze?
Yes.
Yes.
But
Yeah.
your voice
I'm
didn't.
sorry.
We
So-
heard your voice. We heard your voice.
My voice didn't. Okay, I can see myself freezing on the screen. So it would be great if more students who graduated stay here. But the reason they are leaving after graduation isn't because, we're not making them feel welcome. I mean, frankly, I don't think, I'm very friendly with all the students on my block, but they didn't come here to hang out with me. I could be their grandmother. So then but that statement that we should be more welcoming so they'll stay after graduation does not jive with their own table 2.15 on page 41, where they list what the employment categories are in the Pioneer Valley. And basically you can work in education's like 66%. And then I think the next highest is health services. So if you want to work in law, business, advertising, communications, media, accounting, you want to work for a bank and finance, you need to leave the Pioneer Valley. That's why they're not staying after graduation. We're not Boston or New York or, I don't know, even a Philadelphia. We don't have jobs here. And then I've started to hear people repeat in the community or on the council and, well, if we're more welcoming, the students would stay. And that's, there's just a logical disconnect there. So I don't understand why the housing production plan is kind of offering those kinds of opinions and recommendations that, again, don't jive with their own data. So one of my suggestions would be taking out some of the editorializing.
Yeah, my kids would come back if they had jobs.
Yeah. Counselor Haneke.
So this is at least the second time we've talked about the housing production plan, and I'm not sure how this conversation is helping us get to a recommendation. I guess I'm sitting here very confused as to, I've heard Jennifer, you talk about these issues, but you never talk about a page. You never really talk about here's things I need changed in order to recommend
I
it.
just mentioned a
I'm not
draft
done yet.
and a page.
I'm not done yet. I know you just talked about that, but in general, you just say this and this. It was an example. So I don't know what we're moving towards. Are we moving towards a list of changes that individual counselors on this committee want to see in going into a motion that says, hey, presuming a motion that maybe Kathy would make that says, we recommend the town council not adopt this housing production plan unless these specific changes are made, or where are we going with this conversation? Because I'm not sure what the end goal of everything that was just said is. Is it actual changes to it? Is it line item changes? Is it just a statement that says, we're not really happy with it, but we're going to recommend you pass it anyway? So that's number one. Number two, I do want to point out in response to some of this conversation on page 1, I think it's 129 of the PDF, there is a cost burden by household income and type that shows that and this is a very generalized, if you assume every non-family household is a student, and I will say you cannot say every single one of them is, but if you do, there are still 1,600 households that are cost burdened and 800 households plus that are severely cost burdened. And the numbers talking about of the production plan of 200 and some SHI housing in the next 5 years is to address those at a minimum. That still doesn't get us to those households all of those households moving out of cost burden shift or close to that. Now you would hope that if there are 260 say SHI houses built that are created that are minus under 50% IMI or for under 30% IMI, then some people that might be in market rate housing that can go into that market rate housing might be a little lower, so that those that are living at 80 to 100% AMI might be able to move to something cheaper and therefore become uncost burdened. So that there might be some sort of downflow effect of creating these to reduce even other households from being cost burdened. But we still need the production. The point is, even if we take out the student non-family households, 263 SHI units in 5 years is still not enough. And I guess the question I have is, do people have a problem with that number? Or is it really some of these line item specifics because you don't like how this is dealt with or that is dealt with? But is the conclusion that is in this document the problem? Or is it specific line items outside of the conclusion? And how, I asked this to the chair, how are we going to get to a vote? Because at this point, I'm ready to just make a motion to recommend the council adopt the housing production plan as presented or as adopted by the planning board. I have a feeling, given the makeup of this committee, that motion would fail, 2 in favor, 3 against. But I don't know where the 3 against that I'm guessing are 3 against are aiming for. And that's what I would really like to hear.
It's a very valid question. Yes. So Jennifer and then Kathy.
Yeah, just so you know, June 1st, when we were asked to submit, I submitted 3 pages and I cited page numbers specifically and charts that I had an issue with. I would like, and I can go through it. I don't, need to go through it. I think there's, like I said, some editorial comments that I think are just not appropriate for this report. I would like to see a recommendation that UMass, that the university build more. I didn't see, I saw an explanation of why the university can't, and they don't expect the university to build more on-campus housing. I would like to see that as a recommendation. And I would actually like the recommendation that we go out and encourage more off-campus student housing to be built. I would personally like to see that not included, because that's the low-hanging fruit. We don't need to go out and seek that. It's not affordable housing. And I'd like to see encouraging, at least saying I would like to see more on-campus housing. So that would be a start. I can add to this, but I turned this in June I think on June 1st, and I sent it to Nate. So this is.
So those comments though were not incorporated. Is that right?
No, I don't think that the report was changed after. I mean, that's
Okay.
just what I was told.
Thank you. So that's good. Those are 2 sort of very specific categories. Kathy.
So, Mandy, I think that was a fair criticism, that unless we're specific, what are we talking about? So I don't have Jennifer's comments in front of me. She didn't send them to me, so that she submitted to the planning board. So my suggestion would be,
She submitted them to the consultant.
Consultants, as we were told to do.
No, I'm just saying that I'm not looking at her page specific comments, and no one has seen mine because I haven't written them. So it would be fair to point your finger to me. So to move us forward, we didn't have a very long discussion. I sent Nate a series of comments and questions, but I don't want him to have to just address the more generic. So if we get Jennifer's specifics, and if I do specifics, having seen hers, that don't try to get to line edits, but just try to get to substantive pieces. So I also thought what I can commit to, I think I can't get it October 23rd, which is 2 weeks from now. I ought to be able to do it by October 23rd and get it in our packet, if I'm allowed to do it in our packet to everybody. So the second thing that I just heard Nate talk about, Mandy, in terms of the cost burden, the reason I was asking for getting specific is if without considerable state money, it's a stretch to get even, so Nate said 30 a year might be doable, or whether it's 30, 40, whatever the number. Having this document explain why that is difficult to do, to at least quantify what we're talking about. Because to move, you would have to have, and it's not, I don't think the big apartment buildings, well, I don't know, but they're clearly pricing them in a way that they don't lose money. But new construction is expensive. And so whatever it is you're building, and I think the apartment buildings per unit are less expensive than anything that's smaller. 3 units, 4 units, those are more expensive per unit than the biggies, because you get all sorts of efficiencies on the biggies. So just giving a sense of, if we do stretch goals, I'm fine with a stretch goal, but a stretch goal that's potentially achievable and achieve something we want. So I'm going to go through the document just on that, because I don't think there's enough of an emphasis. If Mandy, you're using the cost burden, if we want to move people out of cost burden, we have to be producing something at a price point that they're not cost burden. Either because we've expanded how many affordable units each new building has to do. And so and that's why I asked developable land. So I also think, who are we building for? and what is the master plan vision of what kind of community would want to be in Amherst. So I will commit to not speaking so generally and getting to page specific, where I think it's stretched beyond the issue. We have a huge issue on jobs for people, on what the job market is in Amherst. So we have people who live in Amherst who commute quite a distance to their job somewhere else. So I do think you need to build for people, for the workforce, to the extent we can. And I think we need to be thinking a bit more regionally. I know we're supposed to do it just in Amherst. We're supposed to just be focused on, but we are a region, and thinking. So I'm going to be as specific as I can. And then where Mandy was pushing to, are we saying, you know, if these are specific areas, either say more or delete a thing or use this in a, draw some conclusions off of this data. If we go through those and two of the people think that's getting way too much specific and they don't want to include that in a report from CRC, some of us like them. If we can get to a point we agree to disagree and take a vote on it, I'd be fine. But you can't do anything if we haven't given you specifics. So I thought that criticism on which page are we talking about? Which comment are you talking about? Which other pieces?
Thank you. Thank you, Kathy. I'm going to cut you off. Nate, I'm going to ask you a question, and that is, so you get 3 things from, you know, Jennifer, and a comment from Mandy, and you get 5 from Kathy. What are you and Greg in a position to actually do with this report, unless it is an appendix that says, here were the concerns raised by a committee? Are you, staff, in a position to actually make changes to create this?
Yeah, no, thanks. I don't know. We would work with a consultant. So, you know, we've, you know, when we, you know, they're, you know, it's their plan. And so if they, you know, so we discussed some of the comments that were submitted previously. We'd send everything to them. So everything that's been submitted in the last, you know, since June. So Jennifer, your comments, Pam, your recent ones before the last CRC meeting, those have all been sent to Barrett Consulting. We haven't met with them to discuss some of them, the more recent comments. And so all the comments that we'd receive, which I think is a good idea to get, we would send to them. And I think it's a conversation with staff and with them about, you know, how would they change the plan? And so where would we see it? And so, you know, I think the conversations are, you know, at this meeting and the last meeting, right? I think there's some points that some CRC members would like to change. And I think that, so yeah, I think to get it in writing is really important. And I think we would work with the consultant. So we don't have the ability to change the plan.
Okay,
And I wouldn't recommend doing it. It's, you know, I think for Barrett too, they would say, well, it's our plan. And so they want to figure out,
that's fine.
you know, where do they want to do it?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's fair. And,
And I'll just add that it may be acceptable to council members if there are some, you know, an addition of a paragraph that explains some of what has been heard, that you're not going to change tables, you're not going to change data points, right? It's trying to tie in a knot what some of those key points are.
right. Yeah. So
thank you.
sorry, just for instance, Jennifer, based on your comment, I know you think there should be more, you know, and I think others think there should be more students on campus, but the consultant could say, well, realistically, that's a difficult thing to achieve. I think there's
Why
also,
not?
it's good to have more students off campus, you know, closer to downtown and village center. So to me, again, if we don't like kind of the thrust of what's in, you know, inferred in the document, is it, like I said, qualifying language or some other, a change in a paragraph to kind of contextualize it a little bit better. And so I think it's, you know, to me,
Nate, I'm
yeah.
sorry, on that comment, though, I'm going to finish up with my comment. And that is, in our walking about town, I would say every second person that we talk to says, why doesn't UMass build more housing on campus? I mean, this is a theme that is not just coming from the 2 of us or 3 of us in this committee. It is something that we hear all the time. So having at least one strategy that says, you know, encourage UMass, that could be a P3, to do some additional housing for their faculty, for their staff, for their students, that really needs to be in there. And it's okay to do it. It's okay to say that.
Yeah, I mean, they do have, to me, they say encourage the development of student housing while preserving home ownership and rental opportunities for year-round residents, is a strategy. And they have a few others. And so to me, revamping the dialogue around student housing to me is not a bad thing. And so to me, it's like, okay, if we just take those strategies, to me, it's like, well, then what we're talking about is where do we put them is what we do after the plan has been adopted. And, so it's not like, let's go change the language now. To me, I feel like they've left it general enough that it's now a conversation we have locally. Right. And so I'm not, but if you feel like that's what you want to have that be part of the comments, have that be part of the comments, and we can talk to Barrett and see how they want to change it. But for me, it's like, maybe the strategy needs to be tweaked a little bit or something. But I just want to see, I'd like to see what we get in, what we receive, and then how they respond.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to go to Greg and then Counselor Haneke.
Yeah, and just kind of following really Nate, on the sort of academic strategy. So one, there is a strategy in there, as I think it's phrased as something like identify 1 or 2 discrete partnership opportunities with academic institutions. But and I would envision that as perhaps some sort of land commitment or something along those lines. Maybe for affordable housing specifically. But I think one of the things to navigate around sort of UMass's role, or like what UMass should do, is I think putting a strategy in that just says, well, we should tell UMass to do this, right? It's not really something we can put our hands on, right? It's not something like, sure, we can do that now. We don't need a housing production plan to encourage UMass to build more housing, but to name it as a strategy, I think what's tricky about that is beyond saying like, send a letter, or something. It's hard to know like exactly how strategies could conceivably be implemented by the town. And so that's a structural sort of process thing. But I think it is important, because I think most of the strategies in there, the town can actively participate in, or some component of the town can participate in some way. But giving UMass directives is a more of a passive thing. So I think it would have a different.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. I think something like this plan can send a message to the town manager, who is in fact the only person that can speak with the university, to ask specifically that they do a larger share. And so I think having that kind of specificity in the plan is not a bad thing. Counselor Haneke.
But it is kind of there. Listening to Jennifer, who said she wants to remove the strategy of encouraging off-campus housing and adding a UMass housing, but strategy D1 that Nate just read, encourage the development of more student housing and workforce housing, doesn't say where that housing is. That can be development of on-campus housing. It doesn't say it has to be off-campus. So it can include and strategy D3, identify discrete housing and strategies with academic departments, directly talks about talking to UMass that you guys were just saying about housing and stuff like that, and on-campus housing and P3s and all of that. So they're there. They might not be worded exactly as you want, but they're there. And maybe that's the one we start with. I think, as Nate has been saying, these strategies are well open-ended, so that you can then say, okay, if we want to identify discrete housing strategies with academic partners, are we talking about student housing as P3s, or are we talking about workforce housing as a P3 for people who are employed at UMass? What's the next goal? This housing production plan isn't meant to get to that level of specificity, exactly what the zoning bylaw might look like or what the financing plan might look like. So I feel like there are, and then the other thing I wanted to say actually is, I would object to, at this point, Barrett making any changes to a document and presenting those changes to us, because without us seeing exactly what they are, because the planning board has already adopted this document. So if any changes need made or get made, we have to send it if the council adopts it with those changes, it has to go back to the planning board. So we need to know exactly what those changes are. If there are coming from what the planning board adopted, we have to be able to see the line changes, right?
Right. And
The
Nate,
other
and Nate
question I
did,
have for Nate is, are Barrett still within their retainer and the stuff, or is every time we go back to them costing the town more money because we're asking them to do something outside of the scope of the work they've already completed and been paid for? Because I'm not comfortable with conversations happening because a counselor, whether it be me or Pat or any of the other three of us, went and said, well, they didn't initially change during the comment period from all the count of all the people in town. My comments weren't incorporated, so we need them to incorporate mine only. Because I did have comments that may or may not have been incorporated between the May draft and the June draft. But that doesn't mean they didn't consider them and then look at all of the information and say, actually, that comment isn't on point with X, Y, or Z. And so we're not, as experts, as the consultants, going to recommend changing the plan and the draft based on that one comment because of all the other things we've heard. So I guess I'm getting, again, more and more uncomfortable, and I want to make sure we're not going above the scope of what they were hired for and
so
what they've paid.
let's good. Let's ask them that question.
Oh, no, sure. This would be a change order to their contract. And so, it'd be an extra amount of money for them to do this. And that, we have some funding for that. So, what I would say is, right, so, we have all these comments. I'm hoping by the next CRC meeting, and it's a conversation with the CRC again, right, of how we want to present or how these comments move forward to the consultant. And I agree, Mandy, that, my vision was that if there were changes made, and Barrett makes them, it's very clear what they are. So that, if it goes to council, it's kind of like the zoning amendment. It's like, here's what was originally proposed and here's what is recommended, with, whether it's, some different text, right? It's very clear what the changes are. So it's not just like an integrated plan that you can't tell. We call it out by page or whatever, right? We're clear on how it's different. And that could be the recommendation, right? So the CRC recommends to town council this housing production plan with these modifications, and it's what they are. I'm not sure, right? But that's to me could be the process or what the upshot is of this. If there's a few things that just really you'd want to see changed, and like I said, I agree. I don't see them changing data tables. I mean, all this, it's maybe it's like I said, qualifiers, or it's what they use the data for. So Kathy's point, like, are the strategies following through with the needs assessment? Is there an overreach, or is there something else there? But
Yeah, thank you. So this is very much in line with the parallel track with, say, the ADU bylaw between the planning board and CRC, and it went back and forth. And then we ultimately had a few changes to their recommended document that went to council. So I'm comfortable with that. Pat, and then we're looking at, it's 5:03, and we're going to try to wrap up. You're muted, Pat.
This committee wastes an enormous amount of time over and over again. Here we have a document that is pretty open-ended, actually, that could have been voted on and moved on, looking at the planning boards. I keep hearing things, some CRC members want specific things. Because you said something we want. Who are we building for? Didn't listen when Nate was saying the conversation is general enough and meets this criteria, says these things. Town manager goals will tell the manager what to do about UMass, not the housing production plan. So we're building for the community of Amherst. I know you don't want to listen, Pam, but you're going to have to.
No, I was just trying to think
we
of-
are building
I
for
think
the
both.
community of Amherst, and the community of Amherst is extraordinarily diverse. And I'm really, really tired of hearing assumptions made over and over again about people. I believe one comment by a counselor was, well, if you look at the kind of cars they drive. I've been volunteering at the Survival Center since 2017. You can't tell jack shit about a person's economic status or what economic pressures they're under by the car they are driving. This is a document that should have already gone out of here. And I'm really, because you don't like it, Pam, because you don't like it, Kathy, specifics, because you don't like it, Jennifer, you're wasting the community's time. You're all sitting here making little campaign statements. I know, Jennifer, you're going to tell me I'm a bad person. I don't have to worry about that again for a few months. I am so tired of how this group tries to manipulate the work of the community.
I appreciate your thoughts, Pat. I don't happen to agree with them, but I appreciate them. I'm going to wrap it up. I think we don't need to add any more fuel to the fire. We have a meeting coming up on the 23rd, and it sounds like there has been some pretty specific information exchanged, and I would appreciate from town staff any kind of indication as we come to that next meeting of how some of those concerns have been addressed, and hopefully it's in a very simple way that acknowledges some of the concerns that some in the community feel about the housing crisis. So we all have a little homework to do. Kathy, you said you had some specifics. Jennifer, you had some specifics. Nate and Greg heard my specifics about estimating the number of students that really want to come to need to live in Amherst, and it's not 9,000, and how that ripples down into some of the conclusions. We have covered carryover items. We have no meeting minutes, and we have already talked about the preview of the next meeting. We had solar bylaw on it. I think I would like to keep solar bylaw only as an update of, has anybody attended meetings? Is there any feedback from any other sources? It can be a 5-minute conversation, but it's on there. Housing production plan will get discussed, and I think there are no carryover items, but we can leave that on the agenda just in case. Kathy.
Just quickly to address Pat's concern of time wasted, and I do apologize that I haven't written mine. If we could focus just on housing production plan and have the goal to have a vote at the end on whether there's anything substantive, and put it to rest. So we have on solar, I don't think we're going to be ready for much more to do. So I would really like just to really focus to move this off so this isn't a continue. And so I request that Jennifer just submit, the others of us can see whatever she submitted to them. And I don't expect, Mandy, I think you're right, we shouldn't be asking for changes unless there's consensus about these changes. I don't think they should be idiosyncratic to a few of us. So if some of the things that bother one or two of us don't resonate with others, I wouldn't want to spend town money on a consultant making changes. I am particularly conscious of not wasting time and or money on it. And I actually didn't understand that I was supposed to, as a counselor, read and submit comments in June, and I missed that this would be a point that I could express an opinion. So I would like Pam to just have it be a focused discussion if we can.
Okay. Yep. I'm actually not going to be able to attend that meeting. Jennifer has agreed to chair that. Good luck.
We don't all, it doesn't have to be a unanimous vote.
Yeah. Okay, I'm making a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Let's go around. Pat,
Aye.
Kathy,
Yes.
Jennifer,
Yes.
Counselor Haneke,
Aye.
Pam Rooney's a yes. Thank you, Greg. Thank you, Nate. Nate disappeared.
Good.
Really appreciate your time. Thanks very much.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.